Welcome to a special grooving episode, one that we are super excited about. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan.
And I'm Christian Hunt.
So as you can see, we've added another voice to this very special episode of Behavioral Grooves.
Or maybe I've added in 2 extra voices to this very special episode of the Human Risk podcast.
Touche, Christian. Touche. This is a very special episode for both podcasts. And if you're not listening to both, you should. What's happening here is a special experience for a couple of reasons. The first is what we just talked about. It's a co-production of Behavioral Grooves and Human Risk.
But more importantly, at least for you, Mr. Houlihan,
yes,
is that we are recording this in London.
Not just London, Kurt, but in the world-famous Abbey Road Studios.
Here we are, yes. And I'm in my own musical heaven right now. And I won't lie to you, I've had the good fortune of recording in some great studios in the world, but I got to tell you, this one takes the cake.
I'm sure it does. But with that, we should probably get going, and we should introduce we have a guest, another guest on this occasion.
Mr. Koen Smets, who we are so glad to have, who has come all the way from Leamington Spa, all the way to London to join us today. This is fantastic.
And so for all our American listeners, they have no clue what that means.
Wayzata.
Oh, okay. Wayzata to Minneapolis for all our Minneapolis people. All right, so what are we going to talk about, guys?
We should be talking about one of our most interesting and most prevalent issues in the world today, as well as in the world of behavioral science, and that is cheating.
Cheating?
Yes. I think that this is totally appropriate for us as all people in the behavioral science world and who have kind of taken a look at this to expand on, to explore why is cheating so prevalent today.
And we, for listeners, we started this because there's a pretty massive cheating scandal that is taking place in the world of chess these days. Hans Niemann, a 19-year-old American, has been accused of cheating in many Grandmaster events, and the world reigning champ, Magnus Carlsen, actually even dropped out of a game with him after one move because he was kind of protesting of this cheating, and there's a whole bunch of elements going on behind that. So that was kind of the first thing that it caught my eye.
It wasn't the how he was cheating that got your
we
attention?
can get to that at a later point. We'll talk about the potential, the memes that are going around about how he was cheating.
Okay, what about walleye fishing? We come from Minnesota. I don't live there anymore, but in the state of Minnesota, northern states in the United States, walleye is a sweet, tender, wonderful fish. It's very popular. There are fishing tournaments all throughout the Great Lakes and region around fishing for walleye, and there is a cheating scandal happening right now among people who have been pushing weights into the fish so that they weigh more so they can win the tournaments.
Winning actually pretty significant prizes.
Right.
Over the course of the past year, the pair that they actually have caught cheating, so some of these others have just been accused of cheating. These people were actually caught where the fish were being weighed, and then they took the fish and they gutted the fish, and in the fish's gut were actual lead weights, along with stuffed in other things into this. But they've won, I think, a couple $100,000 over the course of the last year, and have kind of they've won every tournament out of, the 8 that they've entered, the last 8. So they kind of had that going. And then the last one is there's also a cheating scandal in the world of high-stakes poker, where Garrett Adelstein, hopefully I pronounced that word right, accused Robbie Jade Liu, who is a newer player. She kind of came into this, and they were playing Texas Hold'em, and huge bet, $167,000 bet that was going on, that even when the announcers, because if you ever watch Texas Hold'em on the television, you get 2 cards down, and then all the other cards come up. And so everybody that views gets to see everybody's cards. And what they were looking at is they were saying, oh my gosh, why is she going all in on this hand? This is just idiotic. And very, that the reason that nobody in their right mind who knew anything about poker would go in on this hand. So that case is, again, it's an alleged piece that she was somehow getting information fed to her from somebody else, and thus she knew what the other hand was and knew that she had a reasonable
Well,
chance
there's
of winning.
also issues right here in the world of behavioral science, right?
Right. I mean, so there's been recent studies that have been reviewed again, looking at things like the Honesty Declaration, where for listeners that are not familiar with this, there was a theory that if you signed at the top of a document, you're more likely to be honest. And we think about that in the context of if you're in court, you're asked to swear on the Bible before you say anything rather than afterwards. And so that was a landmark study in 2012, I think. And that's now been reviewed again and is subject to some questions as to the accuracy of that. And so I think it's fascinating that it's not just in the world of sort of competitions, it's also in the world of scientific research.
Yeah, and that paper has actually been retracted by all the authors now. So
Yeah. Kuhn, I think there was another one actually that we talked about as well in the world of cycling.
Yes, I mean, there's cheating all over the place. This happened, I think my sense of timing is a bit wonky since the pandemic, but it's fairly recent, probably a year or two ago, when in sort of a high-ranking amateur cross-country cycling, one of the competition cycles was found to contain, wait for it, a battery and an electric motor.
An electric motor?
In competition. And basically, it's baffling that something like this can happen. But I think it illustrates how a desire for a particular outcome can cloud people's judgment or influence people's judgment as to what is and is not acceptable. And I think maybe this not being impartial about the outcome of something is a key influence in cheating.
Yeah, is this a conflict of interest kind of thing, or is it just pure intention?
Well, I think the conflict of interest is a consequence rather than the source, I think. But obviously, if you are competing, you want to win. That's your desired outcome. And you can achieve that by being the best at whatever it is and competing in a fair way. Or there are alternative ways of getting to the end, like sort of stuffing weights into a fish or equipping your cycle with an electric motor and put batteries in there. And I think you can also do the same thing in scientific research, where instead of saying, I'm totally impartial, I'm investigating this, I don't care what the outcome is, we'll just look at the facts, and whatever the outcome is, that'll be it. Or you may have motives for a particular hypothesis to be verified and confirmed, or to be
the opposite.
The opposite, yes. Mm-hmm. And I think as soon as there is some of that, there is a little bit in you that says, I'd really like it to go that way rather than that way. Then the risk of cheating begins to pop up, I think.
I think it's fascinating too, because what you're just talking about is a contextual component, right? It is a element of there's an opportunity that presents itself because of the situation with some predetermined, I want this outcome and I'm in a situation. And we often think about cheating, lying, cheating, similar kind of things as more personality based, that you are a cheater, that you are somebody who cheats or somebody who lies. And what I'm hearing, Kuhn, you say, and I'd love to hear what Tim and Christian, your thoughts on this as well, is this some is it personality based? Are people cheaters and liars, and thus given the situation they will do that while others would not do that? Or is this purely just because of the situation?
I think we've got to be honest, right? I think we're all capable of it. And let's go even further than that. I suspect we have all, on some level, cheated to get an outcome that we're looking for. Now, you would be the one exception, Kurt, but for the rest of us, I think we clearly have to admit, look, there are times when, and it may not be a serious thing, but there will be times where we have done things to get ourselves further up in a line or to get an outcome that we're looking for that we know we've kind of bent things and we can justify that. And I think the moment we get into the realms of that's something those people do, it's really dangerous.
I think I would agree. And I was just going to say, and I not only that, I never cheated, I never lie about cheating either. So there you go.
I don't know who I'm talking to now. I don't even know you.
But I think you're right, Christian. I think we all have it in us. And I think with the Enron scandal 15 years ago, the theory of it's a few bad apples was thoroughly debunked. It is not a few bad apples. And so I don't think I mean, there may be pathological liars, and I think they do exist, but I think we all have it in us. When I was probably about 6 or 7, I was supposed to go to the doctors with my mum, and she forgot the appointment.
Yeah.
And so she rang up to say, "Oh, my son is ill," and so we couldn't come. And I wasn't ill, so that's how I discovered the concept of the white lie. And I think it was probably defining my ethical framework in a way which is sort of stretches farther than I would have imagined at the time. I mean, it didn't make me a compulsive white liar, but it taught me that lying and honesty is not black and white.
Yeah.
There is a spectrum. And so whether or not this was justifiable at the time, it can be debated. And I think some people might think, well, that was fair enough.
Yeah.
And others might think, this is terrible educational intervention there.
Yeah.
I have 2 things on that. Sorry to interrupt. So one, your mother talking to a doctor, very similar to my mother talking to my school when I was a senior in high school. I skipped the last class. We came back, me and my friends came back. We were playing down in my basement, everything. And the next day, the school called up to my mom, and she said, no, he didn't have an excuse. I had made up something like I was going to the doctor, and the school said, oh, so I got detention, where my 2 friends, their mothers, both lied for them and said, no, they're fine. So I got detention where my 2 friends did not. And so, again, you talked about how that framed your thing. And I've used that as this piece of like, I do something wrong, I'll pay. Not that I haven't ever cheated or lied.
And they've
I would
both
do
gone
that.
into politics, right? Is that what's happened to them?
Yeah. But I wanted to go back to the bad apples thing, because Tim, you have some thoughts on this, just about that it's not usually bad apples, but bad apples can ruin the barrel.
Yeah, this goes back to the Bobo effect. The Bobo doll was basically a small punching bag with sand in the bottom, made for young children, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, in the United States in the 1960s and 70s. And so a researcher brought a Bobo doll into a group of kids playing. They're 5, 6, 7, 8, and they're all just playing with a bunch of different toys. But then a Confederate comes into the room and beats the daylights out of the Bobo doll, really punching it hard, and then leaves. And then the researchers watch what happens. And what happened most of the time was that kids started to be more aggressive with the Bobo doll. They felt like it was okay to, and especially young, little boys. It was like it was okay to be super aggressive now with the Bobo doll. And I relate this to our, I'm going to just say that this is the political news in the United States starting in 2015, 2016 with Donald Trump. He made it okay for everybody else to be, to say whatever was on their mind. There were a number of conservatives who said to me that they were so happy that Donald Trump was in office because he said what was on their mind. And I feel like this is sort of a Bobo doll effect to some degree. So I don't I agree with your Kuhn, with your comments that there is intention, that we need to think about intentionality and purpose and outcome. But I think there's also the sense of permission that can come from just, if we see other people doing it, that can create a more hostile environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think social norms is key in many behaviors, and including in that. But it only is that way because we have that capacity to cheat or to sort of make different trade-offs, ethical trade-offs, depending on the circumstances. And we look at, because I think, when do we look for social norms? When we're not certain. We don't have an innate certainty. Right. I mean, we're not like Mother Teresa or somebody who says, I'd never cheat. So we look for guidance around us. And clearly not every individual in our field of view is equally weighty. And so the president is somebody who's got more influence. And so, well, if the president does it, then it's probably fine. It fits. And so we will not necessarily be as egregious as he was with
we don't have
making
to
up
be.
facts.
In some ways, we actually don't have
we
to
move
be.
a little bit towards the well, that's kind of acceptable in this circumstances.
But does it also, going back to the cheating part, and I will go back to maybe bike racing or the Olympics, where they did some of the hormone replacement and other additives that are going on there, and you hear the story that says, well, everybody's doing it, and so for me to compete, I now have to do the same thing. So there's a part where it becomes acceptable, the social norm part, but there's also then this, I'm at a disadvantage if I'm not doing these things because I believe everybody else is. And I will go back to the United States. What worries me is that there is a belief upon many people within the United States that cheating has occurred in the presidential and other elections.
Yeah.
So now, because there's a belief that it has occurred from one side, that the other side is actually going to say, well, if they're cheating, we need to cheat, and so they will figure out some way to cheat. Even though there's been no evidence of cheating in any instance, it's the perception of cheating, and thus it's unfair, and I must level the playing field.
Right, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because we sort of think about social proof as sort of copying other people sometimes subconsciously. But what you're talking about there is a conscious thing where we just go, well, I wouldn't normally do that. But I can see that they're playing, the rules of the game have changed, right? And I'm now going to have to do I don't want to do this, but I'm going to have to do that in order. And then it's used, as you say, as a weapon to justify more. So it's, in a way, it's kind of just scaling up and becoming even more challenging.
Well, and what you just said, I think, actually is a really interesting piece, because, Christian, this idea that I wouldn't normally do this, but you're forcing me, so I'm still a good person. My self-identity is not challenged in that way. Whereas if I was just doing it, I have to somehow create a story to say, I'm still a good person.
Yeah. Well, we have an innate belief. I think everybody in the world, with some exceptions again, believes they are a good person.
Yeah.
So we just rationalize whatever we do, so that what we do is fits with our self-image, and
so that we're happy. So we get up in the morning and we feel good about ourselves.
Yeah, we don't want to wake up and think we are evil or dishonest. So I mean, we have these irregular verbs. I'm
it's cognitive dissonance.
I'm economical with the truth. You are kind of bending the truth a little bit, and he's a liar.
Right.
So we get this, and sort of closer to home, the more righteous we see ourselves, and people close to us. I mean, okay, they're a little bit further away, but still close enough. And then these are the bloody cheaters.
I am concerned about the social side of this, though, because there's a little bit of a game theory thing going on here, where the more that we see certain people defecting, then it gives us good reason to defect as well, even if that's not normally our mode. But when we see that enough, then we're prone to defect from the truth more easily, and that's concerning. And I'm not sure what the remedy is. I wish I had some kind of an antidote, but maybe Kuhn does.
No, I mean, I think there is probably another important behavioral driver behind it, and that's the need to belong. And as you were saying, Kurt, you're in some kind of sports and you want to be at the top, and you see everybody else cheating, so you want to be part of that community of top sporters. But the only way you can be part of it is by taking part in this illicit...
In the cheating itself.
Yeah, in the cheating. And I mean, you can see it in other circumstances as well. Imagine you join a new company, and you're kind of, well, I'm not taking any stuff home or whatever, but you see other people doing it, and they look at you, oh, well, are you the friend of the boss? I mean, you're not taking part in sort of, cheating with your expenses or stuff like this, and you're drawn in because you want to belong. You don't want to be an outsider. Right. And this I think, like the desire for a certain outcome in scientific research is a driver to, well, what can I do to make that happen? Belonging can also be a driver that messes with our ethics, I think.
So we're just... Behavior is really easy to understand, is what I'm hearing. This is a very black and white thing, this and that there's not multitude of components. But in all seriousness, the fact of the matter that there are all of these different influences that are acting both as a preventer of cheating, but also as a facilitator of cheating. And, for not to say that cheating is a new thing. Cheating has been around since, the beginning of time, lying, various different pieces of that. And maybe it's just becoming more apparent now, but to this point, we're seeing these things. They're coming to light more often. And so I'm wondering if those balances that we had, where there was always a certain amount of cheating going on. I mean, you go back to Lance Armstrong, you go back to Barry Bonds, you go back to, all sorts of different pieces throughout history.
Shoeless Joe Jackson in the early 20s, the World Series. He, threw it because of a financial gain to him personally.
So, but this idea that those checks and balances that are there are somehow getting out of kittywampus.
Right.
Is a little bit disconcerting for me.
I'm with you there because again, this if it becomes more socially acceptable to just fudge a little bit, to just push the boundaries a bit, not to say that this is just a slippery slope. I think that it's a real. If we literally erode our moral foundations as to what we believe is right or what we want to try to strive for or try to adhere to, that's a bad thing for cultures because cultures and civilizations operate on a fabrication of what we believe is common, that we believe that people will behave in a particular way in this particular culture. And if that breaks down in such a massive way, this is the end of Western civilization.
You think it adds risk to?
But it's interesting, right? Because I won't talk about US politics. I'll talk about UK politics. Given we're here in Abbey Road, let's focus on. We had Boris Johnson, Prime Minister here, who effectively was thrown out of office for, frankly, lying and covering stuff up. And what's really interesting is there are certain rules of the game in politics. Everybody knows that it takes a certain time to go into politics and certain expectations. But for example, there is an unwritten expectation that people won't lie. And that they won't lie in Parliament. And that therefore we just work on the basis that whatever else they might do, they're not going to. And he broke that convention. And so the structures that are put in place rely on, to a certain extent, people behaving in a particular way. And that's been. Now, the positive spin on this is actually the system has still worked, right? He is no longer in office and he was found out and dealt with. But.
It wasn't an easy road either.
No. It wasn't. It happened because it required some people to stand up and do things and behave in a way that there's. And you could argue, well, why did they do that? Did they do it for the right reasons, or because they worried about their own personal future? But it was interesting that some of the conventions, a lot of the things that we do are driven by conventions, and so you were having people, I think, testing those conventions. And I want to give listeners a little bit of a movie tip if they haven't seen it, which is a movie called The Invention of Lying, which stars Ricky Gervais. And it's basically about a world where no one lies. And magically you have this one guy who discovers that, hey, you can lie. And you can see so really fascinating from a behavioural perspective. But I think it's interesting that we all recognise that we shouldn't be cheating and we shouldn't be lying and we shouldn't be doing all these things. And we build structures, I think, to perpetuate that. And that's some of the checks and balances that we have to stop it. And then you get people. And so the question I think you're asking, Kurt, is this a new thing? That suddenly people are subverting these models that we've had for some time that seem to have sort of worked. Is it maybe that there's greater transparency on it nowadays? And actually this has been happening over and over again, and maybe these things are okay and we just at a certain point. I don't know.
So I will go one step farther and talk about potential elements on this that really worry me. With the advent of AI and some of the deep fakes that are going on out there, you have the potential of creating something that is fake and putting words in your mouth. So therefore, Christian, I'm making you sound, or I make you say something outlandish that, now goes and gets all this popularity. And we know that you do that, and then even if it's proven that it's a deep fake afterwards, the damage is done. It's been out there. It's because it's there. We know it's anchored in there. Even more concerning to me, however, is what would happen if, so again, we take a look at our former president, President Trump, and he was recorded right before the 2016 elections. A recording came out that was kind of famous of him grabbing women and doing various different things because it was a voice thing, and then finally got a little bit of video at the end. And he never denied that he said that, right? That was always in that realm, that he was out there. But I would make the assumption, or there's a conjecture that could happen, that if that were to come out today, he would just, that's a fake. That's a fake. And the people that want to believe that will now have adjusted. They can't just go, oh, he said that, I have to justify that action some way. Now his followers can go, that was a fake. You guys, it's the Democrats who are trying to do that because that's what they're always trying to do and getting worse.
I'm probably less worried than you are about those kind of things.
Give us some hope, Kuhn.
Yeah, well, I mean, Photoshop before fake videos, deep fake videos, was equally capable of fabricating images that were untrue of people meeting each other and stuff. It's never been a big problem, I think. And I don't expect the moving images to be more of a problem. I think the claims that things that are true are fake have always existed because people are motivated to not reveal certain things and therefore deny that whatever happened. And if evidence is brought to bear, then it's falsified. And ultimately, whether or not it is falsified doesn't matter to either party. The people who are with the person being accused will believe that it's falsified and continue to support whoever it is. And the people who believe it is true will continue to believe it is true. Yeah. So I don't really see that as too much of a threat.
But is that okay?
Well, it's not okay. And I think on where we were a bit earlier, I think going back to maybe my mother's white lie to this doctor, we are much more lenient for dishonesty if it's in our favor than if it's not.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily if it's against us, but if it's neutral, then no, don't lie. But if it's good for me, then, well, we are kind of accepting of bending the truth a little bit.
Or even better, if I didn't say it. If Kurt lied for me,
yes,
then
well,
I didn't.
Which I do all the time, talking about how smart you are and all these things.
But right,
It's
we are
amazing.
quite capable to. I mean, stuff like I don't remember saying that, which may or may not be true, but it's impossible to prove that I don't remember it. I may very well remember that I said something, but it's possible. I mean, this plausible deniability is a fantastic instrument in dishonesty. But what I think might be behind the apparent increase in that kind of cheating and dishonesty is that we are more polarized. And so you have whole groups of people who think this is in our interest, so this is what we will believe and consider to be true and profess as the reality.
So that neutral component is getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yes, exactly. So and it really is, you're either with me or against me. If you're with me, then you will believe what I say. If I deny this, then it is untrue. If I say this is true, then it will be true, and vice versa. And so this middle ground of, well, hold on, this is not that important to me. So I think the rule of let's be honest and fair dominates here. And I think the sort of self-interest, not the personal self-interest, but the group self-interest begins to weigh too heavily, I think, in our judgments.
So how does that play into the world of behavioral science that we are dealing with? This idea that there have been accusations of data falsification and, outright known some places where this has obviously been faked, different pieces of that. Because I would hope that within the community that, if you're following the scientific principle, you're following it from the perspective of saying, we will go where the data shows.
Yeah.
And we know that's not always the case.
Why wouldn't you flip the presumption of saying, look, if it happens everywhere else, why are we surprised that it's happening in this space? And I think one of the challenges with this whole subject is that we live under this belief that it shouldn't be happening therefore, it isn't. I'd love it for it not to be happening. Of course, I don't lie, so therefore, that's the and you continue. And so, a little bit of me thinks actually maybe we should just take from the premise that it's part of life, right? There are going to be incentives for certain people in certain situations to do things that are unacceptable. Let's not necessarily call it lying, but sort of fudging of things or being slightly disingenuous about how things are presented. That's a natural function of human beings being involved in an activity. And so maybe to a certain extent we shouldn't be shocked by it, and we should just say, look, that is going to happen. We have to recognise this discipline is, in other words, this discipline is not immune to that dynamic.
Is it okay? I guess, in other words, I'm not asking if it's morally okay. Is it acceptable? Is it something that we want to treat more aggressively so that, I've been reading all about game theory now, so recently, so forgive me. But if there's a severe enough punishment for the transgressor, then that can act as a warning to future transgressors. Is there a punitive way of dealing with this, or do we just let it go?
The silence in the room.
Yeah,
is,
kind of a lovely pause there.
I think it's probably the hardest question. I think you said, Kurt, cheating has been with us for centuries and thousands of years.
Yeah.
So if our ancestors haven't come up with a mechanism of killing it off,
that's interesting. There is almost a DNA genetic effect to this that it's built into our system.
And I think ultimately you can trace it back to self-interest. I mean, without self-interest, we wouldn't be here. And then morality, that's a big question. How did that emerge, and how has it begun? Because I think we can probably be fairly certain that in the animal world, morality doesn't exist. There is no such thing as morality there.
Right. There's no right and wrong.
No,
so
that's right. Yeah. So we invented it. I also don't think that formal punishment is really that important. I mean, just look at sort of career criminals. They get punished all the time and get jailed, and they come out of jail, and within 3 weeks they commit crimes again. So
some people are this.
That's a corporal punishment. What about a social punishment?
Exactly, and I think the social punishment, I think, could go much further, ostracizing people who, or temporarily or whatever, basically. And I think maybe for that we need to get a better understanding of what their motives are.
Yeah.
For instance, if you cheat for status, if you then take away the status, then that is going to
that's going to hurt.
That's going to hurt. But it's also going to be a signal to other people who pursue status and are willing to compromise ethics.
Well, so that worked with Napoleon in the early 1800s. You could put him on an island, and we didn't have to worry about him. But in the world of social media and email and video and dozens of heralds for virtually anyone's perspective can continue to take up the banner and sell the story of whatever that they want. I'm concerned that removing one person isn't enough. It might be something.
So, but I think this is if you. So the criminal piece, right? It's almost a badge of honor that I've been in prison. That there's an element that I get elevated within my community, within my group.
Could be. Yeah.
This idea of finding out what is going to ostracize that person that does this from that group that they are looking to be a part, or that they are a part of. I think that I would be very hard pressed to say, all right, if I believe that if I do this and I get caught, there's a whole thing of if I believe I'm going to get caught or not, but we'll take that out of the equation, that this is the social cost that I will have to pay. And if that social cost is large enough, I think that will inhibit even, copycats.
Yeah. And I think it probably worked quite well with our ancestors 15 million years ago. For a piece I was writing, I just did a bit of research, and it seems that about 50 million years ago we formed tribes. Before that, we were solitary nocturnal creatures,
Yeah.
our primate ancestors, and then 50 million years ago we started living more during the day. We were more vulnerable to predators, and so safety in numbers, we bunched together and so could protect ourselves. But that meant we needed to be able to trust each other, not to steal each other's food and stuff. And so I think in smallish tribe-sized communities, ostracization or the threat of it was very, very serious, because you couldn't really survive on your own anymore.
I think part of that might have been woven into our DNA now. And
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
But I think obviously we work on such a large scale now that this idea of tribe is hard to map onto our present day society, I think. And so there's many more places to hide.
But what's interesting, I mean, you talk about sort of getting status with certain, that's a different tribe, right? So I leave the tribe of the mainstream and I become the tribe of the punished people. So we've all been to jail. That's a separate,
Yes.
I mean, quite literally, in many cases, gang that you're then a part of. So it's exactly the same dynamic. But I love this idea of using it as a powerful force, because I think it doesn't fit. All of our judicial systems work on logic, right? So the longer the prison sentence, the more I'm gonna get you to do. And we know that loads of other times where we try and apply logic to situations, it doesn't work. So I really like the idea of bringing in some of these other behavioural drivers that we recognise and know in other contexts. I think social is a massive thing. We just have to be really careful. And of course, we know it's not simply a case of saying, we'll ostracise you, because that doesn't work in the context. We've got to think intelligently about how we deploy it. But I love that line of thinking, because I think that's much more creative than let's lock a bunch of people up because that'll tell them.
Well, I mean, we assume that they value their freedom so much that they will refrain from committing crimes in order not to get locked up, and that is
Some do.
Some do,
yeah.
but I think the other piece of this is that, again, we have belief about ourselves that I know that many people get caught doing this, but I'm going to be so smart about it that I won't be caught, and therefore my probability of having anything happen is so low that I will go ahead and do this because I don't feel. That's a whole separate issue. And I think we could probably go on and on and on and on about this, but I think probably let's wrap it up here.
Yeah, look, I've no doubt we could keep going on this subject, but we then have to book out another studio at Abbey Road.
Count me in. I'm there. I don't care what we're doing. If we're going to be back at Abbey Road, that'd be fantastic.
Amazing. Well, look, to all the regular listeners of Human Risk Podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. Do check out Behavioural Grooves.
Yeah, and thanks for all the Behavioral Groove listeners who are listening in, and we hope that you check out the wonderful and varied topics that Christian talks about with his guests on Human Risk.
Yeah, and of course, we hope that you find this conversation as helpful as any of our conversations collectively, and that this helps you go out and find your groove.